everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chelsea. If you're new here, I make New York City advice videos. Actually, this is probably the last video I can make on my apartment. Prior to this video, I've made a moving vlog into this studio. I've made how to find a leased apartment and how to find sublets in New York City video. And I also have a studio tour. But again, this is just my experience. And yeah, I made mistakes along the way, but I'm gonna share with you what those mistakes are so that way you can learn from them. That's the whole point. Anyways, I got my computer here with some notes that I'm going to be referring to as well. If you don't know, I've been living in New York City for about 5 years and I have moved 9 times since I moved here. If you're not new to my channel, that is like old news, beating a dead horse. I'm sorry, I know. But all of those living experiences prior to this one were with roommates. 2 of them were with a lease. One lease I was able to secure on my own, and the other one I needed a guarantor. And then this is the first time I've lived alone and had to go through that leasing process alone without roommates. But at the time I was on unemployment, so I knew that I couldn't secure my own leased apartment without a guarantor. So if you're not from New York, a guarantor is what a cosigner is. Those 2 words are synonymous. The official definition of a guarantor is the responsible party that signs onto the lease and agrees to take on or assume the obligations set forth under the lease, most notably the payment of the rent. So it guarantees to the landlord that they are going to get their money no matter what. If you don't have an income that's 40 times the amount of the rent of the place that you're applying for, then you're going to need a guarantor. And I was lucky that I was able to find a guarantor that was a family friend that already lived in New York City. And some landlords can be tricky with that because a lot of them do prefer guarantors that live in the tri-state area. But I have had a guarantor before in my first apartment that was out of state. And it really just depends on the landlord. But the requirements for a guarantor begin at the guarantor needs to make like 80 to 100 times the amount of rent of your rent. I know that is like insane, honestly. That number is so high, but it's basically telling the landlord that they can cover their rent and also your rent. Because I had a guarantor, they didn't run a credit check on me. They didn't ask for my proof of income. Obviously, I was on unemployment. But before I even started my search, I had to make sure that my guarantor wasn't going to back out because this was going to affect what type of apartment or living situation I needed to search for. And I really didn't want to waste my time because if I didn't have a guarantor, I knew I couldn't qualify for my own place. So I would need to be looking for sublets or roommate situations instead. And I probably honestly would have just stayed where I was living. So that was my first step, was securing my guarantor. So what I'm about to say is probably the most important information. If you were to take anything away from this video, it's going to be this: have your guarantor get all of their documents ready ahead of time. The reason why it's so important that you have your guarantor get these documents together, like almost before you start even searching for apartments, is that process can go so quick. And having your guarantor prepared with all their documents before you search could be the difference between the landlord choosing you instead of choosing another prospective tenant because they didn't have their documents lined up, like it took them too long to get everything together. When I was looking, I didn't have this list of required documents. I had some idea because I've moved so many times, but they gave me this handy dandy little notebook. Blue's Clues. Oh my God. They gave me this handy dandy PDF that showed the documents that you would need depending on your situation. I'm gonna pop that on the screen. Please pause this video, take a screenshot of that, save this, because no matter what your situation is, this is gonna be so helpful for you. It's what you need if you're employed and you make 40 times the rent, if you're self-employed, if you're a student, and if you're a guarantor. They're probably going to run a background check on your guarantor and maybe even yourself as a tenant, even if you do have a guarantor. Either way, what they're asking honestly is standard for New York State, for New York City specifically, and they might require less and they might require more, but this is a good place to begin. Hey, real quick, if this video is helpful for you, make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to click the subscribe button. Okay, sorry, back to the video. So basically I gave like a 2-month notice to my landlord that I was moving out of my current place. And because I also had 2 roommates, we all just kind of had to decide who was going to stay, who was going to go, what was going to happen with the current place because the lease was supposed to be up October 1st. If you're in a living situation with roommates, you should tell them as soon as you know that you're going to move. It's common courtesy because a couple of them might want to stay and sign on again and they would need time to fill the rooms or you would need to help fill the rooms. Give people notice and don't screw people over because it's a lot of money. An extra month's rent is a lot of money and some people can't cover that. And give your landlord as much notice as possible as well in case everyone moves out and they need to hire a broker or somebody to fill the space. So since I had to be out of my apartment by October 1st, meaning I wanted everything out of my apartment, my moving day was gonna be like September 30th because October 1st would technically be the move-in date for the people moving in after me. Because my move out date wasn't until the 30th, starting my apartment search on September 1st is honestly really, really early. The odds of me finding something were very minimal that early on. If you want to try and secure something that early, you're most likely just gonna have to pay for example, the whole month of September to hold that apartment, because they could ideally find somebody to fill the space on halfway through the month. They're not just gonna hold the apartment the entire month and not ask for money. But I started searching really early because one, I just have chronic anxiety about it, and two, I wanted to see what neighborhoods, especially since COVID kind of changed the price range with a lot of places in Manhattan. I wanted to get an idea on what I was looking for and what my price range would be. And sometimes like there are golden nuggets that are like people trying to do a lease takeover that want to find someone as soon as possible. They're going to be wanting to find someone reliable to agree to take over their space by set date and not need to move in any earlier. So it just doesn't hurt to start your search that early, but just don't get your hopes up, honestly. And I'm not going to go into like what you should look for in ads or what like my best searching tips are in this video, because I've already done that in my other video on how to find a leased apartment in New York City. But I was using StreetEasy and apartments.com pretty exclusively. Oh, as well as Craigslist too, because you can find some gems on Craigslist. Again, I go over that in my other video. So in my search, for example, we'll just pull up the StreetEasy website. I would select rentals. That's important because I didn't want to buy the property. And in neighborhoods, I selected all New York City and New Jersey. New Jersey is honestly a popular place to live, even if you have to commute into the city. There's so many public transportation options and a lot cheaper rent as well. I selected my maximum price to be $1,500, and then I selected studio. And I never selected the no fee option because I just didn't want to limit the amount of units that would come up. What no fee means is that you don't have to pay the broker fee, which is a certain percentage of your annual rent. So it can come up to like a few $1,000s extra that you just have to pay the broker. And no fee means that the landlord covers the cost of the broker and you're not responsible for any of that. All you have to pay for is the deposit, which is usually 1 month's rent, and the first month's rent. So if the perfect apartment came up and it was cheaper, like under my budget, but it had a broker's fee, I would consider that apartment, because if it's everything I'm looking for, I don't mind paying the broker's fee because it evens out. My rent is a little bit cheaper. I'm paying a broker's fee, so it evens out to my budget. But again, I didn't want to limit my options, so I didn't select that button. So my search would be getting no fee and fee apartment and feed apartments, and possibly apartments where you'd have to pay a fee. And this is what kind of why I'm sharing this experience with you, is because I do get anxiety about not knowing where I'm gonna be in a month. Like, I don't want to get to the last week of September and not have a place to go. It's honestly just a risk, because sometimes in the last week of the month, that's when the best deals come out, because the people who are looking to fill these units are scrambling for people to move in on the 1st, and they're going to try to entice people to do that. But my anxiety would never let me wait that long, especially for a leased apartment, maybe for a sublet. But because I had a guarantor I also needed to coordinate with, I wanted to allow as much time as possible. And because it was the end of the lease at my previous place, I wanted extra time to get myself out. So I decided to look for something for a move in the middle of September. And that means that I would have to pay double rent for 2 weeks. But honestly, I was okay with that. And I was even more okay with that if it was a no-fee apartment, because the money I would spend on the broker, I spent paying double rent. So I had like technically 2 homes for 2 weeks. The beginning of the 2nd week of September, I found a place on StreetEasy that is this place. And the ad was stating that they were looking for someone to move in mid-month. And so I was like, let's do it. A really important thing to do is to call the number of the broker or whoever listed the apartment. Don't email, don't press like the request a tour, because you're just gonna get lost in the sauce. And it's so rarely that brokers get those phone calls, and that really shows that you're serious about it. That's what I did. I called the number, I left a voicemail, and I ended up getting a text like within a couple hours scheduling a viewing for this apartment for the following day. So let me just say it again, that it's imperative you have all your documents in order before you even view the apartment, because once you go view the apartment, that process, it's up to you honestly whether you succeed or fail. If you walk into that apartment like I did here and was like, this is it, that's it, then you want to get that ball rolling. You don't want to sleep on it. There's no time to sleep on it. I think after I viewed this place, I ended up calling my guarantor afterwards. I was like standing outside the building and was like, I think this is it. I think this is the one. And there was no broker's fee. And I was like, all right, we're doing it. So 20 minutes after my viewing of this apartment, I called my broker and I was like, I'm doing it. That night, she sent me all the documents that I needed, that like golden ticket list that I showed you earlier. She sent me that. I know it gets so stressful in this time because you're not the only person applying, honestly. New York brokers are notorious for having multiple people apply at one time. And I think there were like 3 or 4 other people in line with me. And I just happened to be the one to view the apartment first because I called the broker. That's why it's so important. Get your foot in that door. So once my guarantor's documents were in, I had to figure out how to get the deposit and the first month's rent to the broker, or to the landlord basically. In my case, I just didn't have the best of luck because my landlord was requiring the payment to be either a wire transfer or a check. And I did not have checks at the time. If I had checks at the time, it would have saved me a lot of a massive headache because the bank I have is pretty archaic and they don't allow wire transfers online. And I had to wait until the next day to even get the wire transfer, that process going. So I was like the first in line for the bank the next day, but having to tell my broker like, hey, I have the money, can't get it to you till the next day. And she was like, She basically like could have dropped me at that point. They're not going to pursue me as an applicant if they don't have that security with me. If they don't have my money, they're not going to want to take me as a tenant, which I understand. So because my bank is archaic AF, my wire transfer didn't even go through until the next day. So for 48 hours, my broker is just pissed at me. And I'm like, I didn't know that he didn't accept like Venmo or Zelle or something. So basically, I think the only reason they didn't drop me was that it would be too much of an issue to get somebody else into that application process at that point, since they already had my guarantor documents, and also like just good faith. Like I had been really communicative with them this entire time. I was checking in with them like twice a day, even if I had nothing new to report, just to let them know that I was still here, that I wasn't trying to flake, that I was really serious. And because of that, they didn't drop me as applicant. And I don't know how that worked, but I'm very grateful that it did, because once they got that money, they were able to send me the lease virtually. And I read that thing. Read your lease. I know the brokers are going to be rushing you to get everything signed, everything figured out, but take the time to read the lease. And I'm not paralegal, I'm not a lawyer of any sort, so none of this is legal advice, but if something rubs you the wrong way, you have all the right to amend parts of your lease. Keep an eye out for also a clause that's like your guarantor has to guarantor you for the rest of your life or something. I'll put the wording on the screen so that you can see kind of what that was. And my guarantor was like, that's sketch, because I only legally want to be responsible for her financially for 1 year, because that's the amount of the lease. But the wording in the document was like, you need to be able to cover her for the entirety of forever, or for like the next 10 years or 5 years. And I've seen that pop up twice, like both times I've had a guarantor. So watch out for that. And they've amended it both times. So I filled that lease out ASAP. I think I used either DocuSign or HelloSign. Both of those were free. And I did my virtual signature. I saved it as a PDF and I sent that along with all of the rest of the documents I needed to my broker. And that process was done. And a side note, your lease is not binding. Again, this is not legal advice, whatever, but your lease is not binding until the landlord signs it. And I honestly didn't know that until my best friend was going through her own really stressful apartment searching process. They signed their lease, they had all their documents in, they were approved, and their landlord just pulled out within like a week before they were supposed to move. And he was legally able to do that because he didn't actually sign the lease with them. So even though they signed it, it wasn't a binding document until he signed it, and then he backed out, and it screwed them over, and that was awful. But just keep an eye out for that. Just because you sign a lease doesn't mean that it's official yet. And ideally, I really wish it worked out where you don't give them any money until you get the keys. That's what I was taught. And in my experiences leasing an apartment outside of New York City, you go to a lease signing like with the landlord, and it's like a swap. Like you don't leave until you get the keys, they don't leave until they get your check. But New York City, especially during COVID, a lot more things are happening virtually, and it just gets really tricky with the timing. So it's a stressful risk, I know. And I felt really stressed. I didn't really sleep until I got my keys. At that point, I was like, I'm moving, but something could happen. Like I just was so stressed out that they would back out, or that something was wrong, or that my guarantor would be like, nah. I just needed the keys to feel that it was official. But in entirety, that process usually takes like 1 to 2 days. So it really happens fast. So you can see how it just really comes down to like good timing, good preparation, and honestly, just some good luck. It can really feel like the odds are against you sometimes. I got lucky that I only had to work on applying for one place. I was never an applicant that was like, now we chose someone over you. There can be a lot more layers on top of it, but just do your best to stay organized. Try not to put all your eggs in one basket too until you give someone your money or you get the keys to some place. Always be on the lookout. Don't like stop searching until you get the keys. Always prepare for the worst to happen, but worst case scenario usually happens is like you have to stay on your friend's couch, or there are options for storage units too if worst comes to worst. Sublet options as well if something with the lease wasn't working out. So it's your responsibility to never leave yourself with nowhere to go. And I know a lot of you moving to New York City don't know people, but there are options for Airbnbs. You have a lot more control over the situation than it may feel like. So get those documents in order. I basically just spoon-fed you the golden ticket. Good luck. And if you have any more questions about my experience or the process, please let me know. If I can't answer, then hopefully someone else reading the comments will. So if this video was helpful for you, please give it a like, share this video with anyone, share the entire New York City playlist with anyone. Give me a follow on Instagram at chell.cal. And as always, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!